Welcome to Conversations Across Time, where we imagine dialogues between great minds from different eras. Tonight, we have two profound psychological thinkers, Dr. Jordan Peterson, psychologist, best-selling author, and one of today's most influential intellectuals, and Dr. Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist who gave us concepts like the collective unconscious and archetypes. What makes this pairing fascinating is that Peterson is one of Jung's most prominent modern interpreters, building upon Jung's ideas about archetypes and the unconscious in his own works. This creative interpretation is crafted from both men's writings, lectures, and interviews, capturing not just their ideas, but their distinct voices. Now, let us witness a conversation that spans a century of psychological wisdom. Let the dialogue begin. Jordan, we'll start with you.
Thanks for the warm welcome. And I must say, it is an honor to be able to speak to you, Dr. Jung. So let's get started with my first question. I've spent considerable time discussing your concept of the shadow. It seems to me that in our current socio-political climate, we're witnessing a kind of collective refusal to integrate the shadow. People are increasingly identifying with rigid ideological positions that allow them to project all evil onto their opponents. Would you say that this unwillingness to confront our own darkness is more dangerous now than in your time? And how might we encourage genuine shadow integration in an age of performative virtue?
Dr. Peterson, that's an interesting question. The shadow is never more dangerous than when a society believes it has transcended it. That what you described reminds me of Europe before the World Wars. The rational mind believing itself to have surpassed primitive impulses through education and civilization. The result was catastrophic. Your modern society has perhaps gone further in this self deception, with your social media platforms allowing idealized personas while simultaneously creating perfect vessels for shadow projection.
One of the things that struck me in my analysis of biblical stories and mythological narratives is the consistent emergence of particular patterns that seem to represent deep psychological truths. I've argued, and I believe this aligns with your perspective, that religious symbols aren't just arbitrary cultural constructs, but represent something like psychologically necessary truths. They're the distillation of millions of iterations of human experience into representational forms that guide proper being. Yet we live in a time that largely dismisses religious symbolism as superstition. How would you address the modern tendency to discard these symbolic systems without recognizing what is being lost? And do you think there's a way to revitalize engagement with these symbolic structures without necessarily returning to traditional religious practice?
Yes, Jordan. You touch upon what I consider perhaps the most significant crisis of modern man, the loss of connection to symbolic life. You see, Doctor, symbols are not invented, they are discovered, or perhaps more accurately, they emerge from the unconscious as necessary bridges between conscious understanding and unconscious reality. When modern man dismisses religious symbolism as mere superstition, he is not demonstrating his sophistication, but rather his naivete. He fails to recognize that these symbols were not created to explain external reality, though they often attempted this as well, but to represent internal psychological processes that remain as active today as they were thousands of years ago. The mistake of the scientific materialist worldview is to assume that because we have new explanations for physical phenomena, we no longer need symbolic understanding of psychological phenomena, but the soul, or what I prefer to call the psyche, continues to speak in symbols, whether in dreams, art, or spontaneous fantasies. Can we revitalize engagement with symbolic systems? I believe we must, though not through artificial means or intellectual exercises alone. What is needed is a recognition that symbols are living entities within the psyche. The Christian, for instance, who has lost connection to the transformative power of his religious symbols needs not a better theological explanation, but a renewed experience of their numinosity. The way forward may not be a return to traditional religious forms, though for some this remains viable, but rather a new psychological understanding that respects the autonomy of the symbol and its purpose in individuation. Without this, modern man remains spiritually impoverished despite his material abundance.
That was very interesting, gentlemen. Now let's switch the questioning, and Dr. Jung will ask 3 questions to Dr. Peterson. Dr. Jung, you may begin.
Dr. Peterson, I must confess something fascinates me about your era. You speak often of these social media platforms, these digital networks that connect millions of minds instantaneously. As someone who devoted considerable energy to understanding how unconscious contents move through collectives, I'm deeply curious, what do you observe happening to the collective unconscious in this new realm? Are we witnessing an acceleration of archetypal processes or perhaps something entirely unprecedented? And tell me honestly, do you think this technological interconnectedness is helping or hindering the individuation process?
Oh, Dr. Jung, that's a bloody complicated question, and I think you know it. Look, what I see happening is simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. On one hand, yes, we're witnessing an unprecedented acceleration of archetypal patterns. The speed at which collective moods, symbols, and even archetypal figures can emerge and spread is absolutely staggering. A single image or idea can reach hundreds of millions of people in hours. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets dark. These platforms seem to amplify the most primitive aspects of crowd psychology while simultaneously giving people the illusion that they're engaging in sophisticated discourse. It's like we've created the perfect laboratory for studying how the collective unconscious operates, but we've also unleashed forces we don't understand and certainly can't control. As for individuation, well, that's where I'm genuinely concerned. These platforms reward conformity to tribal thinking while punishing genuine individual reflection. They're designed to be addictive, to capture attention, not to promote the kind of deep, difficult self-examination that real psychological development requires. So, ironically, despite having access to more information than any generation in history, people might actually be becoming less individuated, more susceptible to mass psychological phenomena. It's quite a paradox, really.
Now, Dr. Peterson, I notice you've become something of a father figure yourself to many young people, particularly young men who seem, shall we say, somewhat lost in your modern world. This intrigues me greatly. In my time, the father archetype was more clearly defined by social structures. There were clearer paths from boyhood to manhood, but you're operating in an era where these traditional structures have largely dissolved. What do you think has happened to the father archetype in contemporary society? And I'm curious, how do you experience this rather unexpected role you've found yourself in as a kind of surrogate father to millions?
Huh. Well, that's quite a way to put it, and frankly, it's both humbling and somewhat terrifying when you frame it like that. Look, what's happened to the father archetype is that we've systematically undermined it without providing any viable alternative. We've told young men that traditional masculinity is toxic, that authority is suspect, and that hierarchies are oppressive, but we haven't given them anything meaningful to replace these structures with. So you have millions of young men who are desperate for guidance, for someone to tell them that their struggles matter, that there's a path forward that doesn't require them to apologize for their very existence. As for my role in this, honestly, I never sought it out, and sometimes I'm not sure I'm equipped for it. But I recognize that when the traditional father figures have abdicated their responsibilities, when fathers are absent, when institutions have become corrupt or ideologically captured, then other figures will emerge to fill that void. I try to tell young people, especially young men, the things their fathers should have told them. Stand up straight, take responsibility for your life, and clean up your immediate surroundings before you try to change the world. Basic things, really. The fact that this is revolutionary in our current cultural moment says more about the crisis we're facing than about anything I'm offering.
Dr. Peterson, there's something that puzzles me about your modern predicament. In my era, people struggled with meaning largely due to the breakdown of religious and traditional structures. Today, you have access to virtually all human knowledge, including unlimited entertainment and material excesses that my contemporaries couldn't imagine. Yet your generation seems more plagued by meaninglessness than any before it. You speak often about the importance of taking on responsibility as an antidote to nihilism. But I wonder, in a world where so much feels virtual, where people can retreat into digital fantasies, where real consequences seem increasingly distant, how do you convince someone to choose the burden of genuine responsibility over the comfort of perpetual adolescence?
That's the question, isn't it? You've identified the core paradox of our time. We have unprecedented access to everything, information, entertainment, virtual experiences, but somehow that abundance has made real life feel less real, less meaningful. It's as if the very ease of access to infinite options has paralyzed people's ability to choose anything meaningful at all. But here's what I've observed in my clinical practice and in talking to thousands of people. The human soul, if I can use that term, still craves real stakes, real consequences, and real meaning. You can't fool the deeper parts of the psyche with virtual achievements or digital validation. The depression, the anxiety, the sense of emptiness that people feel, that's their unconscious telling them that they're not living authentically. So when I talk about responsibility, I'm really talking about re-engaging with reality in its full weight and complexity. It's harder than retreating into digital comfort, absolutely. But it's the only path I know to genuine meaning. The irony is that in trying to make life easier and more comfortable, we've actually made it more difficult to find reasons to live. People need to be needed. They need to struggle against something meaningful, even if, especially if, that something is their own limitations and potential.
And there we have it, a meeting of minds across the decades, where timeless insights meet contemporary challenges. Two brilliant thinkers united in their commitment to understanding the human psyche and the quest for authentic meaning. Thank you for joining us for this imagined dialogue. While these conversations exist only in our minds, the ideas they explore are as real and urgent as ever. The need to integrate our darkness, to connect with meaningful symbols, and to find purpose in an increasingly complex world. Until next time on Conversations Across Time, remember, as both our guests would surely agree, the most important conversation is the one you have with yourself. Thank you for watching.